Hello students, welcome to my live teaching learning session of BECC 134 Principles of Macroeconomics 2. We have discussed in previous session IS and LM curve analysis. In today's session we will discuss about inflation and its types. It's very important topic because in your syllabus inflation and unemployment unit tells you that what is inflation and what are the various types of inflation and what is the relationship between inflation and unemployment. But in today's session, we will discuss only inflation and its types. And in next session, we will cover inflation and unemployment. So let us start from first topic, meaning of inflation. In this unit, you will study about meaning of inflation, price index, types of inflation, and distinguish between demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. So, first topic is meaning of inflation. Inflation. Inflation means continuous or persistent rise in price level. When price increases continuously for the long time period, that is called inflation. And inflation is a general phenomena because it occurs time to time. And in India, after first 5-year plan, at the first 5-year plan, inflation rate was very low. But after that, first 5-year plan, inflation always increases. So inflation meaning is the increase in the amount of money necessary to obtain the same amount of product or services before the inflated price was present. Social phenomena where too much money chases too few goods and services. If you have to spend more money to buy less amount of goods and services, that is called inflation. Because at the time of inflation, price goes up. When price goes up, then you will have to pay more for buying any quantity or goods and services. So it's harmful impact because the purchasing power of the currency changes downward in value. In India, inflation problem is not a very common. It's a very common problem. It's not a very new problem because it exists from the last so many years. Inflation always decreases the value of money. As well as money supply increases, inflation also increases or price level increases, but the value of money goes down. So inflation is a general phenomena and it occurs due to rise in supply of money. When money supply rises, then price level also rises simultaneously by the same proportion according to Fisher's quantity theory of money, and value of money is negatively related with price level. When price level rises, money value falls. So inflation means continuous or persistent rise in price level. Now next is in economics, inflation is a rise in the general level of prices of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. Inflation is a flow concept. It's not a stock concept because it is related with period of time, not a point of time. Point of time concept is stock concept, but period of time concept is flow concept. And flow concept is related with time period like per day, per week, per hour, per month, per year, etc. So in economics, inflation is a general rise in price level of goods and services in an accounting year or in a period of time. When the general price level rises, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services or less amount of goods and services. Because when money supply increases or price level increases, then the purchasing power of the consumer falls. And when purchasing power falls, then we can buy less amount of goods and services by paying huge amount of money. That is the main problem of inflation. Now, next is according to C. Crowther, inflation we can define that it's a state of position in which the value of money is falling and the prices are rising. So, according to Crowther, Crowther is a very great economics to give the best definition of money. According to Crowther, money is a medium of exchange, and money has a store of value. Money can be easily transferable from one place to another place, and money is a standard of deferred payment. And Crowther explained the concept of inflation also. And according to Crowther, inflation is a state in which the value of money falls due to rising price level. In economics, the word inflation refers to general rise in price level. It measured against a standard level of purchasing power. When price level increases, purchasing power of the currency goes down because both are inversely related with each other. But money supply and price level are positively or directly related with each other. According to Fisher's quantitative theory of money, Fisher's theory explained mainly three things. One is money supply and price level. Both have positive relationship. Money supply and value of money have negative relationship. And third is price level and value of money have negative relationship. It means whenever money supply rises, whenever RBI issues paper currency, coins, notes, etc., then money circulation will rise. And due to rise in circulation of money, purchasing power of the people will rise. Their demand will rise. When demand will rise, then you know that resources are limited and wants are unlimited. So production can't be increased according to the increase in demand because resources are very limited or scarce. There are only main four producing factors, that is land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. But as well as population increases, the demand for goods and services also increases. But supply can't increase according to demand. That's why inflation problem exists. So inflation refers to general rise in price level. It measured against a standard level of purchasing power. So this is the definition of inflation. And inflation is defined by different economics in different ways. Now, what are the main features of inflation? Features or characteristics, or we can say that what features or what assumptions involved in inflation. Number one feature is inflation involves a process of the persistent rise in prices. It involves rising trend in price level. When price level increases, that is called inflation. But increase in price level must be continuous or persistent. Then it will be called inflation. It's a state of disequilibrium because when demand is more than supply, then generally inflation occurs. So if demand and supply both are equal, that is called equilibrium position. So inflation doesn't occur at the time of equilibrium or at the point of equilibrium. Inflation generally occurs at the state of disequilibrium position when demand is more than supply. And inflation generally occurs due to scarcity of resources because when resources are limited as compared to their needs or wants, then inflation problem exists. And it's a dynamic in nature. You know that whole economy is dynamic. We are living in a dynamic world. Nothing is static in this world. So inflation is a dynamic in nature. Inflationary price rise is persistent and irreversible because when price increases, that can't be reversible. So it is irreversible in nature. Inflation is caused by excess demand in relation to supply of all types of goods and services. Because we know that as well as population increases, aggregate demand will remain always greater than aggregate supply. And when this situation happens, then inflation always exists in an economy. It's a purely monetary phenomena. According to Milton Friedman, it's a purely monetary phenomena because inflation occurs when money supply increases. And money supply is increased by RBI because in India, RBI is the apex institution of monetary authority. And RBI can has a monopoly power of issuing paper currency, coins, notes, etc. Whenever money supply rises, price level also rises simultaneously by the same proportion according to Fisher, Irving Fisher, but not by Keynes. And inflation is a post full employment phenomenon. When economy achieved full employment level, after achieving full employment level, then nothing will rise, only price level will rise. According to J.M. Keynes or John Maynard Keynes, when money supply increases in the beginning, rate of interest will fall. When rate of interest will fall, then investors will encourage to take more loans from banks and financial institutions. When investment increases, then obviously production will also rise. Employment will generate. And this process will continue till until the full employment level is achieved. And after the achievement of full employment level, then if money supply increases, then only price level will rise. Output, employment, and income will not increase. So, according to Keynes, inflation is a post full employment phenomenon. Or after the achievement of full employment, then this problem of inflation exists, not before that. And it's a long term process because inflation is a monetary phenomena, and when price level increases continuously for the long time period or persistently, that is called inflation. So these are the main features of inflation. Now next is inflation There are different types of rate and so many causes behind the problem of inflation. Inflation has different types. Inflation rate may be moderate, inflation rate may be galloping, inflation may be hyperinflation, and inflation may be demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. So there are different types of inflation which maybe exist in an economy, and we can define this different types of inflation according to inflation rate and other different types. The two main types of inflation is demand pull and cost push. Number one inflation rate is moderate inflation. When inflation rate is lies in between of 5% to 8%, that is called moderate rate of inflation. And one rate of inflation is mild inflation. When inflation rate lies in between of 3% to 4%, that is mild inflation. Or lower than 4%, that is mild inflation. And mild inflation is good for the economy. But hyperinflation is not good for the economy. If inflation or price increases by the rate of 2 to 3% or 3 to 4% or in between of this range, that is good for the economy because producer will encourage. When price increases, producer will encourage to produce more goods and services. When producer increases the production of goods and services, then employment will generate, investment will rise, output will rise, and income level will also rise, and economic growth will exist in an economy. And if inflation rate exists in between of or lies in between of 6% or 5% to 7%, that is moderate inflation or below 10%. But if inflation rate lies in between of 10 to 15% or 17%, if inflation rate is in two digit, that is called galloping inflation. And hyperinflation is a situation when price increases by 100% or by 200% or by very fast rate, that is called hyperinflation. And hyperinflation is bad for each and every economy because in case of hyperinflation, money value decreases and money decreases or money lost its purchasing power. When money lost purchasing power, then central bank or RBI or Fed have to issue more paper, new paper currency to solve this problem and to overcome from this hyperinflation problem. Next problem is or inflation type is demand pull inflation. It is clear by its name, it's a demand pull inflation. So this inflation exists or occurs due to increase in aggregate demand. When aggregate demand increases and aggregate supply remains less, then this demand pull inflation exists in economy. And cost push inflation mainly exists when cost of production increases. As well as cost of production rises, then price level will also rise. So these are different types of inflation. And we can say that these are different rates of inflation. And there are so many causes behind this problem of inflation. Now, what are the kinds of inflation? One is creeping inflation. When inflation rate in between of 2 to 3%, that is creeping inflation or mild inflation. Walking inflation is a situation when price level rises by 4 to 6% in between of this range. Running inflation exists when inflation rate lies in between of 10% to 12%. And hyperinflation is a situation when price level increases by 100% or 200% or 300%, that is hyperinflation. Hyperinflation mainly occurred in Zimbabwe, Germany, and Venezuela. You can study about these three countries' situation of hyperinflation. In recently, a few years back, Venezuela suffered this hyperinflation problem, and during World War time period, Germany faced this problem of hyperinflation. So hyperinflation is very bad for the economy because at that time money lost its purchasing power, and government has to issue new paper currency coins to overcome this problem or to solve this problem. Now next is forms of inflation. Number 1 is creeping inflation. Creeping inflation means the price level increases very slowly over a period of time. When price level increases at a very slower rate, that is creeping inflation. Different forms of inflation mainly tells us about are based on the situation of a child. So in the beginning, when child start before running, before walking, creeping situation exists. So creeping inflation is that situation when price level increases at a very slower rate at a period of time. Moderate inflation means the rise in price level is neither too fast nor too slow. When inflation rate exists in between of uh, below 10 digit and in between of 5 to 8%, that is moderate inflation. Now next is true inflation. It takes place after the achievement of full employment. And full employment is a situation when all people who are willing to do work at the prevailing wage rate, they get job opportunities. That is called full employment. And at the level of full employment, involuntary unemployment will not exist, but voluntarily people unemployed. So it takes place after full employment of all factor inputs in an economy. It's a situation of full employment. The national output becomes perfectly inelastic. Inelastic means when output will not increase, income will not increase, and investment will not increase, only price level will rise. That is called true inflation according to J.M. Keynes. And more money will lead to higher prices and not more output. So, at the time of full employment, income or output level become inelastic and curve will be vertical or parallel to the y axis. And semi inflation is that inflation a country may experience inflation arising from bottlenecks even before full employment. So before full employment, situation of inflation is called semi inflation. There may be inflationary price rise in some sectors of the economy. You know that in each and every economy, there are three main sectors exist. One is primary sector, next is secondary sector, And last is tertiary or service sector. In primary sector, we include agriculture and its allied activities. In secondary sector, which is known as manufacturing sector, in secondary sector, all types of industries like small scale industry, cottage industry, tiny industries, medium size industries, large scale industries, all industries included in secondary sector. Secondary sector is manufacturing sector who produces goods and services with the help of inputs or raw material. And third sector is service sector or tertiary sector. In this sector, all services like banking, insurance, communication, transportation, all are included in service sector. So when inflationary price rise in some sectors of the economy, that is called semi-inflation. And it's a situation which exists in an economy before the achievement of full employment, because after the achievement of full employment, what type of inflation exists in an economy? That is true inflation, which you can see. But full employment, you know that it's a very rare situation, because no one country can achieve this full employment situation, because at the point of full employment, voluntarily people remain unemployed. Now, next is types of inflation. In this, inflation can occur sparingly by creeping, in which price do not increase by more than 10% per year. Galloping or running inflation is that inflation when price rises by 20% to 200% a year is already a serious stress on the economy, although the prices are not difficult to predict and include option transactions and contracts. The most disastrous form of inflation is hyperinflation, which is astronomical growth of currency in circulation and as a consequence, a catastrophic rise in commodities prices. When balanced with respect to inflation, prices rise moderately while for most goods and services. That is called moderate or balanced rate of inflation. And in case of unbalanced inflation rate for various goods and services are rising at different times and in different ways for each type of product. So these are different types of inflation according to inflation rate. Now, what are the causes of inflation? There are different causes which are responsible for rise in price level. Number one is increase in money supply. You know that government make budget, and budget is a statement which shows government expenditures, expected expenditures, and expected revenues in an accounting year. Whenever government expenditures are more than government revenues, then deficit budget government make. And in case of deficit budget, to compensate this deficit or deficit budget, RBI issues more paper currency, coins, notes, etc. That is called deficit financing. To compensate this deficit budget, government give order to RBI to issue more paper currency. That is the situation of deficit financing. And in case of deficit financing, money supply increases. And money supply increases. Whenever money supply rises, price level also rises. So due to rise in price level, for what what are the main reason behind that increase in money supply? Because government make deficit budget. And why government make deficit budget? Its main reason is that government expenditures are greater than government revenues. When government revenues are less than government expenditures, then government will make deficit budget. And to compensate this deficit budget, RBI issues paper currency, coins, notes, etc. And money supply will rise. When money supply rises, price level rises. So this is the main reason behind the occurrence of this problem of inflation. Now next is supply chain disruption. It means when supply of goods and services are less than its demand. It means people are demanding more goods and services, but the supply is less or in short. When supply is less than demand, then price level will rise. Third is government sponsored unemployment. You know that sometimes government government increases the price level, and government gives subsidies or so many benefits for solving the problem of unemployment. In this case government expenditures will goes up. When government expenditure will go up, then revenue will be less than expenditures. And again, the same problem will occur. Budget will be in deficit, and to compensate this deficit budget, RBI issues paper currency, coins, notes, etc. Then money supply will rise and price level will also rise. And next is poor government policies. When government make poor policies for the economy, then inflation problem exists. And sometimes government also increases like minimum support price, which is fixed by the government. If government fix the fare of railways or transportation, then and when government increases the price of petroleum or diesel or CNG, then transportation cost will rise. And due to rise in transportation cost, uh, each and every commodity price will go up. So, due to adopting poor policies, inflation problem exists in an economy. So, these are the main causes of inflation. Now, how is inflation measured? How we can measure the inflation? Inflation can be measured by mainly two indexes like producer price index and consumer price index. The producer price index measures the average change over the time in the selling price received by domestic producers of goods and services. So, producer price index measures the average change or mean change over time in the selling price. You know that producer produces goods and services and sell it at a particular price for a fixed particular price for that commodity in domestic market or in an international market. So producer price index measures the average change over time in the selling price received by domestic producers of goods and services. And consumer price index measures the average change over time in the prices paid by the buyer because it is related with consumer. So consumer always pay price for goods and services, and seller receive price to sell after selling their goods and services. So, consumer price index measures the average change over time in the prices paid by the urban consumers for a defined market basket of consumer goods and services. So, in this way, inflation can be measured. Now, next is inflation. In short form, we can say that inflation, what is inflation, how we can measure it, and inflation is good or bad. How you can say that inflation is good and how you can say that inflation is bad. So, inflation can be defined that rise in price level continuously or persistently that create the problem of inflation. And inflation can be measured by consumer price index or producer price index. And inflation has so many causes behind this problem of inflation. We have discussed that inflation occur due to rise in money supply and by adopting poor policies by the government, and sometimes government provide more subsidies. In this case, government expenditures will rise and revenues will decrease. And when cost of production rises, then price level will also rise. And inflation is good or bad? You know that mild inflation is good. Moderate inflation is good for the economy, but hyperinflation is bad. Galloping inflation is bad. Inflation has some positive impact because when price level increases, producer will encourage to produce more goods and services. When producer increases production of goods and services, then output will rise, employment level will rise, income level will rise, and economy will grow at a faster rate. But if inflation increases by galloping rate or hyperinflation exists in an economy, then money lost its purchasing power. In this situation, money has no value. Money can't purchase bulk amount of money, can't purchase any type of goods and services. In this economy, will suffer a huge problem. So hyperinflation is very bad for the economy. But mild inflation, moderate inflation is good for the economy. Its positive impact is higher paychecks can help economy to grow at a faster rate, and it helps to the borrowers. In case of inflation, debtor situation will be much better than creditor, or borrower's situation will be good than lenders. Next is how we can compute a price index. Price index can be computed with the help of this formula. For example, if we have given basket prices in the base year $12,000 and basket price in the current year $13,200. Now compute the price index or CPI, Consumer Price Index, for the current year. Now what formula we will use? Price index in the current year divided by price index base year. Price index current year is 13,200 divided by 12,000. Then we can get the CPI and multiply by 100. Then we can calculate price index. So price index generally tells us about the ratio in between of current year price and base year price. Then we can measure price index. So CPI in the current year is 110, and 110 indicates that price in the current year are 10% and 10% higher than the prices in the base year. So in this way, we can compute a price index. It's a very simple to calculate. By using this formula, price index in current year divided by price index in base year. Or second, if basket prices in current year is given and basket prices in base year is given, then we can use this formula, basket price in current year divided by basket price in base year. And here basket means the total amount of goods and services which consumer buy at the particular price which is prevailing in the market. Now next is demand pull inflation. How demand pull inflation can be defined and how we can explain with the help of diagram. This is very important form of inflation, that is demand pull inflation. And it is clear by its name, when demand for goods and services increases and supply remains less, then price level will go up. So if price rises due to rise in demand, then supply, that is called demand pull inflation. You know that demand curve generally slopes downward. Aggregate demand. Here, aggregate demand by all the country people for goods and services. And you know that demand is in price level. When price rises, demand falls. When price falls, demand rises. So aggregate demand curve, we will draw downward sloping curve. And aggregate supply, which shows the total amount of goods and services which is supplied by producer at a particular period of time, that is called aggregate supply. And aggregate supply is directly related with price level. When price rises, supply rises. When price falls, supply falls. So aggregate supply curve is always upward sloping curve and aggregate demand curve is always downward sloping curve. Where both curve intersect each other, equilibrium point is determined. At this equilibrium point, price level or income level will be determined. On x-axis, real GDP we have taken and on y-axis, price level is written. Now, if aggregate demand increases in this diagram, first aggregate demand is AD1 and aggregate supply curve will remain only 1 because here we are showing demand pull inflation. So we will change only in aggregate demand, not in aggregate supply because we assume that supply remains constant. When only demand increases and supply can't increase due to increase in demand, in that case, only price will rise. So when demand increases, demand curve will shift to the right hand side. And demand of AD1 to shifted to AD2. Now next, this new aggregate demand curve, where this curve intersect aggregate supply curve here. This is another equilibrium point. For example, we assume that first equilibrium point is E, the new equilibrium point will be E1. At this equilibrium point, price level will rise and income level will also rise from Y1 to Y2. So occurs when aggregate demand grows at an unsustainable rate, leading a positive output gap. It means actual GDP is more than potential GDP. And second is when there is excess demand, producers can raise their prices and thereby achieve bigger profit margins. And third is demand pull inflation is most likely when there is full employment of resources when aggregate supply is inelastic. Here supply curve is upward sloping. But if aggregate supply remains constant or inelastic, in that situation, only price will rise due to rise in aggregate demand. Income level or output level will not increase. So this is the demand pull inflation, and we can represent this inflation with the help of aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve. And you know, demand curve is downward sloping curve and aggregate curve is upward. Both curve intersect each other. Equilibrium point is determined. If aggregate supply remains inelastic, can't increase or decrease due to change in demand, then only price output level will remain same. So it will create the problem of demand pull inflation. Now next is demand pull inflation according to classical approach and according to Keynesian approach. It can be shown with the help of these two approaches. The diagram, the shape of a LRAS curve will be different in classical mode and in Keynesian way. According to classical approach, long run aggregate supply curve remains always vertical or parallel to the y-axis. Because classical, according to classical theory, we assume that full employment is a very simple and we can easily achieve this full employment situation. So, according to classical theory, when employment exists in an economy, then its cycle will be vertical or inelastic. In this situation, aggregate demand curve is same as downward sloping curve. First AD curve is AD. First is this. And if aggregate demand increases, then only price will rise. If we see that AD2 intersect LRAS curve at this point, then only price will rise. Income, output, and employment will not increase. And this curve is SRAS. This is upward sloping curve, which is showing aggregate supply curve. So where aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve intersect each other, short run aggregate supply curve intersect each other, equilibrium point will be determined. At this equilibrium point, y to y2 is a full employment, then nothing will increase. Means income, output, and employment will not increase, the price level will rise according to classical approach. But according to Keynesian approach, aggregate supply, it will be in the after that it's a moderate or situation, then at end aggregate supply curve will be. So here aggregate supply, this is and supply, aggregate supply is horizontal or parallel to the x-axis, that is Keynesian range. And this in between of classical and Keynesian range, the middle range is called intermediate range, which lies in between of classical and Keynesian range. And after that, when aggregate supply curve become vertical or parallel to the y-axis, SRAS curve is short run aggregate supply curve. Aggregate demand, you know that it's a downward sloping curve where aggregate demand curve intersect LRAS curve. First equilibrium point A is determined here, A point where SRAS1, LRAS and aggregate demand all are intersecting at this point. First price level will be determined P1 and income level will be determined Y. This is full employment level of equilibrium because LRAS is showing that economy is in full employment situation. When aggregate supply due to rise in costs affect each other, at this equilibrium point, price level will rise from P1 to P2 and income level will fall from YFE to Y2. So this is the situation of cost push inflation. Now next is causes of inflation. You know that demand pull inflation is inflation initiated by an increase in aggregate demand, and cost push inflation is inflation which occurs due to rise in cost of production or which is caused by an increase in cost. Demand pull inflation and cost push inflation, we can make differentiation between these two types of cost. Demand pull inflation is a situation when the price level rises because of excess demand condition in the market, and cost push inflation is a situation when price rises because of increasing cost of production. And demand pull inflation generally occurs in case of rise in population, rise in income, etc. These are the main responsible causes of demand pull inflation. And rise in the price of factors of production such as fuel price, wages cost, and the main causes of cost push inflation. Now, what is hyperinflation? Hyperinflation occurs when price level increases by 100%, 200%, accelerating and perceptibly unstoppable rates of inflation. Two things happens as a consequence is general price level of goods and services increases, meaning currency losses real value, and the real value of economic items generally stay the same. That is hyperinflation situation. And hyperinflation, you know that main examples of hyperinflation is Germany, Zimbabwe, Hungary, Venezuela. When price level increases by 29,500% every 3.7 days and 79 billion percent in Zimbabwe and 13.6 quadrillion prices doubled every 15 hours in Hungary. That is the examples of hyperinflation. And you know that inflation is a general phenomena, and inflation is not stable and depends on economic growth, expectations, and monetary policy. You know that RBI can increase the money supply and can decrease the money supply. When RBI increases money supply, then price level will also rises. When RBI decreases money supply, then price level will also falls. So RBI can increase the rate of inflation and solve the problem of deflation, and RBI can solve the problem of inflation. If RBI follows strict monetary policy, then inflation will be controlled. And if RBI follows contractionary monetary policy, then inflation will be controlled, and expansionary monetary policy at the time of deflation. So, emerging market targets their inflation in order to maximize economic growth. So, in today's session, we have discussed about inflation, concept of inflation, and the various types of inflation in which we have discussed creeping inflation, mild inflation, galloping inflation, running inflation, hyperinflation, demand pull inflation, and cost push inflation. In next session, we will discuss about the relationship between inflation and unemployment. Thank you.